Welcome to the Multichain Nation podcast. Today we have Ritwik, co-founder of SYNTHR. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks, Rudy. Thank you so much for having me. Really excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm super excited to learn more about SYNTHR and how they're using Axelar. But before we get into that, what is SYNTHR? Tell us a quick overview of your project.
Sure. So we're building a cross-chain infrastructure that enables zero slippage cross-chain swaps. So we use omni-chain synthetic assets, multiple consensus layers, and a combination of high-quality oracles to create this unique sort of zero slippage cross-chain transaction environment. So, in a nutshell, users can use SYNTHR to trade any asset on any chain, or simply move between chains with zero slippage and high security. So at the core of SYNTHR lies this zero slippage transaction environment, or the zero slippage omni-chain liquidity layer that we're effectively focusing on, which is built using synthetic assets. So one can always look at ourselves and call ourselves a synthetic asset protocol, but we're using synthetic assets for much more than just trading. That is one definite sort of outcome of what SYNTHR does. But we're using synthetic assets to enable users to move between networks seamlessly.
That's interesting because I know with some smaller projects or coins, if you do a trade, you see the slippage notification saying, "Oh, 0.05% slippage," or like if you just play around and say, "Oh, what happens if I do $1 million worth?" and you see a huge slippage. So protection, I guess, from whales who can easily just destroy or make the market. It's interesting how you're able to help protect against that. And using Axelar and using your own crossing technology, how are they intertwined?
Uh, so, uh, Axelar is actually one of a critical sort of component in the entire sort of architecture that we've designed. So, SYNTHR is synthetic assets, effectively, right? That's where the name comes from. And like I mentioned in the initial part of the conversation, we're using synthetic assets to sort of facilitate these zero slippage cross-chain swaps. Now, Axelar helps us. So we use Axelar effectively as a GMP for the entire protocol, which is general message passing. So whenever, say, a user wants to swap one synthetic asset on one network for another synthetic asset on another network within the protocol, within SYNTHR. So we use Axelar to securely transmit this message from one chain to the other. So for example, if you're swapping synthetic ETH, say on the Arbitrum network, for maybe synthetic BDC within the Avalanche network, right? So SYNTHR effectively uses Axelar's GMP framework to send. So it burns synthetic ETH on the Arbitrum network, and it sends a mint message on the other network to mint an equivalent dollar amount of the asset, which is synthetic BDC. So that's how we use Axelar in the entire process, because whenever you're dealing with a cross-chain protocol, right? So security. So on one side, there is capital efficiency, right, which is something that synthetic assets can solve. I feel that when it comes to cross-chain capital efficiency, two things need to be taken care of, right? One is, like I mentioned, efficiency from a cost perspective and security perspective. Synthetic assets is the peak of capital efficiency when it comes to sort of cross-chain capital flow and capital management. The other significant piece is security, right? Because all the sort of security instances that we've seen over the past couple of years, and anyone who's been in DeFi for more than one cycle knows that the security lapses have always been in cross-chain protocols, right? That's because there is this sort of because nobody tries and solves the entire sort of problem. They try and focus on one while completely ignoring the other. That's something that we could not do, right? Because we said if we have to create this ultimate sort of transaction environment for cross-chain transactions, like I mentioned, we cannot just focus on capital efficiency. We'll also have to focus on the security side of things. So that's where Axelar effectively comes in. So we don't rely on our own sort of relayers to transmit this message, because we kind of feel that there needs to be an iron curtain between the core contracts which deal with synthetic assets and the contracts which effectively deal with the transmission of messages. So we rely on independent GMPs, which in this case is Axelar, which helps us transmit this message. So, like I mentioned, if you're switching from synthetic ETH on Arbitrum to synthetic BTC on Avalanche, the message of burning on Arbitrum and minting on Avalanche is sent using Axelar, and they effectively give us this secure framework to transmit messages from one chain to the other, which is a very core component of the entire architecture, because that's essentially how SYNTHR effectively operates. We are constantly communicating between multiple networks. We also have a ledger which keeps into account the total quantity of synthetic assets across every network. So even if you're, say, trading assets within one particular chain, so for example, if you're trading assets within Avalanche, right? You don't wish to perform a cross-chain transaction, but you just want to perform a slippage-free transaction within the Avalanche network. So let's say you're switching from synthetic BDC to a synthetic USD. Now, what SYNTHR also effectively does is it always keeps a check, or it maintains sort of a ledger, which is a unified and aggregated ledger of the total type and the total quantity of each synthetic asset on every network. So the moment you switch from a synthetic BTC to a synthetic USD, the aggregated ledger sort of takes into account that switch from synthetic BTC to synthetic USD. That message itself is sent on the Arbitrum chain, where the centralized ledger is sort of maintained. So at every sort of nook and corner, Axelar is very sort of fundamentally intertwined in the overall architecture of how SYNTHR performs and SYNTHR functions.
Now, when you first, I guess, thought up of creating SYNTHR, when did Axelar come to mind? Was SYNTHR an imagination, just an idea, and then you found Axelar and said, "Oh, this would be perfect," or did seeing Axelar generate the idea of SYNTHR?
So I've actually been very passionate about the cross-chain space for quite some time, right? So in my previous sort of avatar, I actually helped build one of India's largest insurtech businesses. We went public in 2021.
Congrats. It's awesome.
Yeah, yeah. So we raised a humongous amount of institutional capital, and so once you're working in a startup in a very significant role, you kind of have to don the founder's hat at every sort of at every turn, right? Because you're literally setting up businesses from scratch, and you're not just looking at sort of one aspect but multiple aspects. So ever since then, the idea was there will be a time when I will have to don the founder's hat as well. So when I got that, so when the company went public, we got a stock option exit. I kind of took that and I plowed that into building SYNTHR. Now, why the Web3 space? Because I think the beginnings for any sort of Web3 nerd right now is we all started trading BTC back in the days, right? Like the days when we had clunky interfaces, etc. Right?
So many horror stories of losing Bitcoin.
Yeah, exactly. All of that. And I think all of us who've probably been in the journey for more than, I would say, 5 or 10 years, you're probably the first guy in your group who started sort of diving into the entire Web3 space and the entire crypto space, because at that time Web3 was nothing but BTC. It was just crypto trading. That's it, right? There was nothing else beyond that. So I obviously started off by sort of investing my own money in BTC, then convincing people around me to invest in BTC as well.
So
they obviously had no
that.
idea on how to do that.
How many times were you laughed at when you suggested to buy Bitcoin?
Too many times, right? I've lost one count now. So I'm talking about being mocked by not just my colleagues, by my friends, and then you would have it your family as well, right? So,
family, friends, classmates, everybody.
That's when you sort of hit rock bottom and you think that, am I doing the right thing? But then of course you're so deep into the rabbit hole. You're like, no, this is how sort of world problems get solved, right? So then obviously I started investing other people's money as well, because they saw me as that channel of entering this entire sort of space, who had sort of figured out the space. And I started off with me investing in BTC, then managing other people's money, invest. They're like small sort of sums of capital. The idea was never to become a VC though. And then, of course, I started. So that's when the DeFi wave also started kicking off, right? I'm talking about maybe say 2017, 2018 ish, right? And then, of course, we saw the huge surge of DeFi in 2020, right? That's when these sort of mad APR DeFi farming, etc. protocols started sort of kicking off, right? But at that point of time, I started consulting for a bunch of DeFi protocols because I just wanted to get more and more deeper into the smart contract side of things, right? How can you build sort of autonomous organizations which are sort of running on these immutable contracts? Because coming from the fintech space, the fintech application of smart contracts has always been the lowest hanging fruit, because I would say the best sort of application of smart contracts back in the day was DeFi. And then obviously came a bunch of other things. And I somehow feel that even today, the best sort of use cases for smart contracts are essentially large scale sort of DeFi organizations, which can effectively tackle and fight with certain centralized sort of incumbents, right? So when that started off, then came the time when I decided to do something on my own. So DeFi was the first space that I effectively wanted to tackle. And by then, of course, anyone who's been in the space long enough would know that you started sort of encountering these lapses, or these security sort of lapses on the cross chain side of things. And then came a time when so many chains also started coming up, because we went through this entire wave of Ethereum scaling solutions, and then we had sort of multiple ecosystems getting built which were trying to compete with Ethereum and trying to become as large as Ethereum, right? Then when I was sort of observing the landscape, then the idea was every ecosystem is trying to sort of fight with one another in trying to be better than the other. But I kind of feel that crypto and Web3 is not a zero sum game. Every ecosystem, features aside, the idea is every ecosystem has its own identity, has its own community. It's like a nation state in itself, right? So it's not that one country is better than the other. Every country has its own culture. Every country has its own art, which is in the form of its memes and NFTs. Every country has its own economy, which is its own set of DeFi products, right? And that's how these sort of countries are evolving and they're growing. It's not just about competing to be the best, it's about being the best you possibly can within your domain, right? So these ecosystems started sort of growing. And then the idea was that no ecosystem is going to win it all. Every ecosystem is going to be a sort of large player within itself. And the user which is now coming into Web3, and whichever protocol, which since I wanted to get into DeFi, the idea was you would have to create a protocol which enables the user of today to experience every sort of ecosystem. And then the answer was clear. The idea was to make better the entire sort of cross-chain space. Because the idea was, if the user of today, and if I'm battling for Web3 adoption today, I have to build for the user of today who is essentially going to want the flexibility of playing around in any ecosystem. So that's when this cross-chain story started picking up. And the idea always was, how can I make cross-chain transactions safer? How can I make cross-chain transactions more capital efficient? Because today we complain about 0.5% slippage. I come from a time when I've paid 20% slippage for certain cross-chain transactions, right? I'm talking about days when, as early as maybe, yeah, in crypto terms, you can call it early, but even, as back is 2022, right? There was a point of time when I was trying to move into certain newer ecosystems, which were certain move-based languages. And there were times when those initial bridges would give you anywhere between 12 to 18% or even 20% slippage, right? And obviously, if you're moving from, say, one EVM chain to the other, you would pay anywhere between 5 to 8% slippage. Now we're talking about slippages being reduced to as low as maybe 1%. And then people then now talk about how can we further reduce that. So the idea was very, very clear that the number of chains are always going to grow, because it is not a zero-sum game. It is not about one being better than the other. It's about having an own identity of yourself and attracting a person who sort of complements your identity, right? Because everybody wants to associate themselves with a brand and culture. So number of chains are always going to keep on growing, but we also need to give the flexibility to the user to move between ecosystems, and doing that in the most capital efficient manner and doing that in the most secure manner. So while we were designing the architecture, because if you deep dive into SYNTHR's white paper and even sort of play around with the product, and this is feedback from actual users who've used the product, because we had a fantastic testnet run, right? We built a product which kind of scaled up to an extent that we processed about 80 million odd transactions on testnet, and we had 135,000 users. And users don't even realize when they've moved from one chain to the other. That's how seamless we've made the
That's the
experience.
goal.
If you're within SYNTHR, and you're interacting with your MetaMask wallet, because if, and assuming that you're only within the EVM space, trust you me, you won't even realize that you've gone from, say, an Ethereum to an Avalanche, and you're suddenly sort of, and the moment you'll realize is when you're instead of paying gas in ETH, you're paying gas in AVAX. That's when you sort of realize that, oh damn, I'm now in the Avalanche ecosystem, right? So that's how seamless we've made it. So we solved the capital efficiency issue, we solved the user experience issue, and while we were designing the architecture, the idea was no such product existed. So we had to create this primitive from scratch. Synthetic assets have been attempted, but synthetic assets have mainly been attempted to address or use them as sort of a trading tool. Our idea was, yes, synthetic assets does give the flexibility to users to trade any asset, but we also want them to be able to trade any asset on any chain. So the idea is using these synthetic assets as an infra layer, so that users can move from one chain to the other, trade any asset on any chain with the highest amount of capital efficiency and security. So while we were designing the architecture, that's when we started speaking to multiple partners. And coming back to your question, I'm so sorry I took this
All
long,
good.
because I mean, given the
There's a lot of
opportunity.
backstory. We have to hear it. We have to know the context.
Yeah. So that's when we started engaging with Axelar, right? And we sort of reached out to them. I think it was through some common investor connection. I don't even remember, because this relationship goes back to as early as June of 2022. And that's when we were designing this entire primitive from scratch. And then we said that, you know what, instead of making the mistake of setting up our own relayers and setting up our own sort of infra for passing messages, let's rely on someone who does this for a living, who's ensuring that this is going to happen in the most secure framework as possible. And they're constantly kind of improving that, because if you partner with folks who are only doing one thing and who are doing that fantastically well, you can be assured that your end user is getting the best of both worlds. So while we focus on the capital efficiency side of things, Axelar enables us to not worry about the security side of things, because all those messages are effectively being handled by Axelar. And so, yeah, so SYNTHR came first, synthetic assets then followed. And then obviously this partnership with Axelar happened. And this has sort of grown on to become one of our most important partnerships. I mean, to an extent that the foundation is even an investor in SYNTHR, right? Yorios is also an angel investor in the product. So
Wow.
that's how
Embedded it is.
yeah, that's how embedded it is. And it's just a sort of matching of wavelengths, the way I see it, because we were obviously engaging with multiple folks. And the kind of passion that we saw within the team, we said, this makes perfect sense for us. So that's why this happened.
That's what I hear a lot when I speak to all the projects I'm talking to and interviewing. They all commend or are grateful for XR for being on the same wavelength as them when they're building and how they're building, what they want to build, the audience, the team, the infrastructure, the essence, the ecosystem is just always in the same wavelength as them. And that sounds awesome for a partnership because the apps or the dApps are being built on top of you. You want to help them, promote them, grow with them, not just let them build and then wave them off like they're no big deal. Like because these dApps are the reason why your protocol is going to succeed and exist and be used.
Exactly.
And for as a developer's perspective, how was the implementation experience with Axelar?
I would say super seamless, because not just the documentation side of things, because to an extent, documentation is something that keeps on improving with time, right? Anyway, but just from the general support, because in terms of teams, because all of us who are in the Web3 space, right, we're all sort of dispersed across the world. And so I'm based in Dubai. Some of my dev team is based in Canada. Some of them are based in India. So coordinating with coordinating internally with folks who are in different time zones, and trying to integrate with somebody whose teams are again sort of dispersed across multiple time zones may come across as a challenge, but the way we were supported, right? So whenever sort of we sent a message, we would get a response within like 30-40 minutes tops.
Wow.
And there were folks within the team who kind of handheld us through the entire process, who ensured that the integration ends up happening, who ended up sort of supporting us even on the initial testing side of things when they said that, okay, let's sort of figure out if everything is working fine. So for us, the integrating experience was a fantastic one. And the true testament is not just from me, but the attestation has to also come from the team. And this is something that the entire sort of team spoke in great lengths about, is that this has been one of the most simplest integrations for us. So like I mentioned, from a support perspective, be it anything, and especially since we're focusing on the integration and the developer side of things, super seamless, super seamless. It seemed as if we were working with our own team members internally rather than sort of external counterparties, to be honest.
Yes. Yeah, it's the same thing. That's what I keep hearing. It's amazing that Axelar really does help in every way. Promote, develop, even just business development and just helping you succeed. That's amazing to hear.
Yeah.
Now that you've heard that you've had a successful test net, what's next for SYNTHR? What's coming up?
Next up is mainnet for us. We're actually in the final stages of our security audits. So we're doing a bunch of internal audits. Then we also have, so we're also working with a bunch of external security researchers as well. So that is the next big thing that we're looking forward to. That's the next big thing that the community is looking forward to. So yeah, that's what every stakeholder is kind of geared towards right now, which is mainnet, which is going to be just around the corner. So we'll obviously have a two-phase rollout. We'll have a beta version that comes out first. We'll obviously be observing certain parameters very, very closely, because um, synthetic assets is a sort of very large undertaking, right? It seems as if we're just sort of minting synthetic assets with Oracle price feeds, etc. But there's a huge sort of framework that goes into supporting that. So you have a minting engine, you have a swapping engine, you have a liquidation engine, and these things are complex as it is, because any synthetic asset protocol is, I would say, a sort of an amalgamation of a lending and borrowing protocol, which is a dynamic lending and borrowing protocol, along with an Oracle based swapping protocol. And on top of that, you also have to manage liquidations. Now, so as is, it's very complex. And the moment you make it cross chain and omni chain, now this is something that I would keep discussing with Yorios as well, is that most people still look at cross chain as simple bridging, right? Because that's the lowest hanging fruit, or I would say that's the first touch point that someone has with a cross chain transaction, is that, okay, what is a cross chain transaction? I want to go from one chain to the other, right? That's it. And that's where the conversation ends. But soon we are entering a phase in which cross chain is not going to be a feature, but it is going to be a fundamental element of a product, right? So earlier was, you could build these unichain products, or I won't call it unichain because Uniswap has already launched its own chain now. But if you would build these single chain products, you could do away with not having a cross chain feature, right? Now we're slowly entering a phase where cross chain is not going to be like a value add. Cross chain is going to be a critical component in the functioning of your protocol. Now, having said that, so like I mentioned, the moment you build a synthetic asset protocol on a single chain, that's complex as it is. But the moment you make it cross chain and you have a synchronized sort of protocol which is constantly in sync with all of its deployments across multiple ecosystems, that's what the future of cross chain is, which is effectively omni chain. So you're on one chain, but on every chain at the same time. That is so the complexity just keeps on sort of increasing, right? So which is why it's going to be a phased rollout for us. It's going to be beta mainnet first, and we are going to observe certain critical parameters. And once we're done with that, I mean, I would hope that it gets done as soon as possible, and then it's going to be our full scale mainnet rollout. But all of this is going to happen in quick succession. That's how we have it planned. We have a very sort of engaged community which is looking forward to all of this. So yeah, we're just uh, we're working
Yeah.
heads down, focused 24/7, and just focused on delivering. That's
Yeah, it's a big step. I mean, I mean, the way you're explaining it, it is complicated, but also sounds simple at the same time. It's just, oh, okay, just get the beta, get the main launch, and then explaining how you're able to uh, communicate with different chains
yeah,
seems easily. I mean, like thanks to XR and thanks to what you've been building your entire career in crypto,
yeah,
it seems almost natural. Like this is the right way to go.
yeah,
But I'm sure there's so much going on in the back end that
yeah.
has more than we can even like get into. Event, but for the people who are looking forward to SYNTHR and like your community, you said you have a pretty large community, but anyone else that wants to get into, anyone that's listening, what can you suggest for community members to do to get involved with SYNTHR, to get ready for beta? How can they help, and what can they do to maybe even build with SYNTHR?
So two parts of that question. How can they be involved? Number one, I would say just head over to our Discord server. Always, it's always buzzing 24/7. So I kind of spend most of my time there. So there was a point of time before I started doing these because I mean, we used to do these AMAs a lot, which were held on Discord, which were held on Twitter and now X. So we would host these spaces events. And then and because I used to be 24/7 glued onto Discord, right? Because I am up all the time. I am either engaged with my developers and my engineers, or I'm sort of working with the marketing team, or I'm working with the biz dev team, right? Or I'm just generally engaging with the community because I kind of feel that the best way to sort of gauge what the users want is to interact with them yourself.
Absolutely.
And that is
Underrated.
something that that is something that every team member has sort of instilled in them in SYNTHR. And this is I mean I owe my prior experience a lot for this because it was always about speaking with the end user directly, right? So I kind of imbibed that from there, and I sort of inculcated that into every team member here as well. So is that while the testnet was running, uh, it's not that we were sort of building and just shipping. We were building, we were interfacing with the end user and constantly implementing feedback and shipping at the same time, right? So the idea was, how can we sort of get their feedback on stuff that we're doing? And a big shout out to the community because they're the ones who actually helped us optimize our architecture as well. So we actually spent the initial 6 months because, like I mentioned, synthetic assets are hard, and building cross-chain synthetic assets or omni-chain synthetic assets just kind of compounds the difficulty. So we spent the first 6 months in building out an architecture. I'm talking about early 2023 when we sort of dished out the first version of the testnet. And then we kind of figured out that it's not as gas optimized as it should be, right? So then, and this is a challenge that not just us, but I'm sure every sort of cross-chain protocol faces. And some of them end up taking shortcuts because the easiest shortcut to take in a cross-chain protocol is centralization, right?
Yeah.
And trust me, speaking from a builder's perspective, it will sort of address half of the challenges and half the difficulties that you have.
Hmm.
And the easiest solution to that is just, okay, let's make this bit centralized, let's make this bit off chain. But then you're just kind of killing the whole ethos of
Yeah.
what Web3 is all about, right? Which is
Yeah.
decentralization. And so, yeah, so building cross chain is hard. Building cross chain in a trustless and decentralized manner is 10 or 10 times, 100 times harder, right? So we kind of realized that the product wasn't gas efficient in the initial days. And we're talking about cross chain gas efficiency, right? So then we thought of, okay, we're not going to take the easy road, which is implementing a bunch of off chain and centralized measures, which a lot of protocols today do. And somehow they kind of end up convincing their user base that this is fine. I keep sort of propagating this, that if someone's telling you that centralization is good and off chain is good, you need to question their character, right? Because if they're in the Web3 space and telling you all of this, you need to question their character. But nevertheless, So then we said, okay, let's go back to the drawing board and let's redesign the entire architecture. So we did that, right? So the community feedback was paramount, and they kind of enabled us to sort of make these changes, because they're the ones who kept on telling us, because they were testing out the product, and then they said that this is the area where we are facing the issue. So coming back to your question, how can users participate? So because I'm always within in the server, and before we started doing these on-camera interviews and these on-camera sessions on X, these live streams, etc., everybody thought that I was a bot, because I was engaged 24/7, and then I had to convince them that no, here I'm on this AMA session, this is my voice. And then the users would say that, you know what, no, voices can be gamed, it can be an AI voice bot or something. Then I actually had to start doing these in-person interviews to actually convince everybody that no, I'm not a bot. I'm actually
Funny.
I'm actually Ritwik Rudra in real life. So yeah, I'm always in the server. Server is always buzzing. So if somebody wants to get involved, just head over there. I'm always available there if they want to sort of ask me any questions, etc. And the community itself is so supportive and engaged. They'll have a wonderful time. The second part of the question is, how can they build on top of SYNTHR? So we've already instituted a grants program as part of the Build on SYNTHR sort of campaign, because like I mentioned, we are not just building synthetic assets to be used for trading. We want synthetic assets to be used further by other protocols, because this liquidity, which is this zero slippage omni-chain liquidity, which is this highly capital efficient and secure form of liquidity, secure thanks to Axelar and our other GMP partners as well. So the idea is they can use this liquidity to sort of plug and play and create these omni-chain experiences for their end users. So for example, perpetual protocols can be built on top of SYNTHR using these synthetic assets. So you can use these synthetic assets as margin and trade on any network effectively, right? Because this liquidity layer is available anywhere. You can build lending and borrowing protocols on top of SYNTHR. You can build RWA protocols on top of SYNTHR. So we've already given out grants to 4 protocols who are building on top of us. Some of them are really unique RWA projects, because that's one area that I'm supremely bullish on. And yeah, so if a developer wants to build on top of SYNTHR, they can get involved, they can apply for the grants program. And if you're just a community member who wants to get involved, we also have season 2 of airdrop coming up, which is going to be post our mainnet beta launch. So they can get involved in the community right now, so that whenever the program launches, they can sort of get the benefit. So for regular users, we have season 2 mainnet airdrop coming up, and for builders, we have the ecosystem grants program.
Wow, it sounds like you cover a lot of the areas for anyone in crypto to come in and just get involved. And that's amazing. That's what we need, because all too often people don't know where they fit in. But it sounds like within SYNTHR they can do what they do best and apply it within SYNTHR.
Yes.
Well, thank you, Ritwik, so much for joining me today and being on the Multichain Nation podcast.
Likewise.
I'm excited for mainnet. I hope everyone here listening is excited for mainnet. And if you just heard about SYNTHR today, please dive in. Again, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Rudy, for hosting this wonderful podcast. Looking forward to many more. Hopefully, we'll do another one once mainnet is out, which is just around the corner. Yeah.
Excellent.